This segment is brought to you by Starrett. Starrett now offers a full spectrum of solutions for strength and material measurement.
Right, so for the next half hour or so, we're going to take a look at a handful of force testing equipment from Starrett. So if your company needs to understand either the tensile or compression characteristics of a material or even a finished product, then you already know the importance that this technology plays in understanding how much stress your product can withstand before breaking, for instance, or maybe how much force it takes to, I don't know, puncture the foil lid of a food product, or maybe you need to measure the frictional characteristics of an anti-skid coating. There's a lot of applications where force measurements are necessary. So joining us via Skype right now to talk about force testers is Eric Perkins of Starrett, joining us via Skype. Hi, Eric.
Hello, how are you guys doing?
Pretty good. Do I have that correct? Force measurements can be used for what? Friction measurements, tensile measurements, compression, all sorts of tests for both products and the work environment.
That is correct.
Okay.
You know, it can be used for many, many different things.
Perfect. Now, you were in our studio a couple of weeks ago, or a week or so ago, to demo some of Starrett's force measurement equipment. I believe the first demo we did was of a handheld gauge. Is that right?
That's correct. We were showing the handheld. It was a DFC for the Force Gage.
Okay, and set that up for us just a little bit. Basically, you know, where you might use a handheld force gauge, for instance.
It can be used for any number of things, like how much force does it take to open a door, for making sure that the doors comply to the ADA Act, for people in wheelchairs to be able to open a door, to any number of things, like in an automotive car, you know, pressing switches and buttons and stuff like that. You want to measure how much force it takes to do that.
Okay, so we're going to roll this clip in just 1 second, but remember, send questions to us via email at qdl@qualitydigest.com, tweet at qualitydigest, or use the chat feature. So let's take a look at the, roll that clip of the handheld force gauge from Starrett. Okay, Eric, well, thanks for joining us. I see that we've got, what, 3 pieces of equipment out here on the table? What are we looking at?
Well, Derek, we've got basically our L1 system.
Okay.
So this is basically our low force stuff. We have 2 different force gauge models.
Okay.
3 different models of standard height test stands. And then we also have the extended that you see over here. Anything with an X is an extended.
And by different models, I'm assuming just different frame sizes? Is that okay?
Different capacities.
Different capacities, okay.
So it's either different travel or different capacities. So 110 model, 330, or 550. Right here we've got an L1 system, which is basically running off of the load cell and a tablet.
Okay.
Or we have the standalone, which is right over in front of you. Basically, you can drive the system up and down by pressing the buttons, and it just goes at a controlled speed whenever you want it to do.
Okay.
So as soon as you let off the buttons, it stops. Or you can do something very unique, industry first.
Okay.
In our DFC model, it is a controller. So what that means is the force gauge, firmware only, controls the test stand.
And when
There's
you
no
say
software or computer hooked up to it. It's the force gauge doing everything.
So when you say industry first, you mean it's the first to be able to be both a standalone gauge and a controller?
Well, it's the first to be a standalone and a controller, but controlling it via firmware only.
Oh, okay.
So that was the big challenge there.
And that's important for like the medical device industries where software
Correct.
becomes kind of a bugaboo.
The validation gets a little sticky there, and costly.
Okay. Let's take a closer look at this. If we can go over here to the gauge cam. Several things I want to point out. One of the first things I noticed when you brought this in is here where you put on your attachments. I noticed that where you put them on, this has got flats on it. What are those? What's the purpose of that?
Well, we found that in the past there's a lot of load cells gets damaged by people putting on different grips and adapters and stuff like that, and they tend to over tighten them. So this allows you to put a wrench on there to tighten it up so you don't torque your load cell.
Oh, so rather than put it on there and just crank it, you would put a backing wrench on it and
Correct,
tighten it.
and tighten it up.
And not mess things up. You know, I was playing with this earlier. I want to point out to people this is actually very ergonomic. You got a nice little grip here. Some of these are like holding a brick.
Yeah.
And this, you got a nice little handle. Fits. I think most people would feel comfortable holding it. It's not too heavy. It's balanced. Feels good.
That was one of the main objectives. Is if it's going to be a hand gauge, make it fit your hand. So instead of trying to carry a brick, that was one of the things we looked at. It's easy. It's comfortable to use all day long. And it definitely feels balanced in your hand. It's not top heavy where you're trying to hold it.
Right. And all the push buttons, I mean, I'm not an expert at using these, but I kind of understand how they work. This button over here looks like it allows me to adjust my my units. So I saw newtons, gram force, kilogram force, pound force, newtons. Let's go back to pound force here.
So you have the two keys that are pointing to the arrows to the outside, pointing away.
Okay.
Those are both programmable. That means you can select them to do whatever you want them to do.
Okay.
Either doing units, could be start, stop, could be transmit. It could be anything that you want it to do on those two buttons in whatever configuration the Force Gage is in. So if you're in the Force Gage controller mode, that would be your start button, and the other one may be return, or it may be transmit, or whatever you want it to be.
Okay.
You can program those keys to do it.
Now I notice that take a measurement, like right now it looks like the arrow pointing down means this is a compression measurement, right?
Peak compression.
Okay.
So if you noticed when you push down on the little hook there, it freezes the display whenever you let go.
Oh,
now it's showing you what your maximum force was when you're doing it. You hit the 0 button, zeros it.
Do it again.
Do it again. So it's fairly easy to use. I mean, it's not really overcomplicated.
Okay.
If you hit the arrow button that you were just hitting again, you'll notice now it'll put it in tension.
Opposite
and now
direction.
when you pull it, it does the opposite direction and freezes it.
Yeah.
We also have average mode in there in real time.
Okay. Now I notice on the back there's something with a hole in it. I mean, what's that for?
Right. So basically, all the load. That's our basically where a load pin.
Okay.
And if you noticed up on the frame on the FMM here, you'll see a little pin on the adapter block.
So that just goes inside the...
It goes inside the hole, and then now basically all the load...
We have to go the other way, I'm assuming.
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
all right, right.
So all the load's going through that pin. So we have 4 little screws that hold onto the mounting block.
Okay.
And you're ready to go.
I noticed the display's upside down. I'm assuming that can be flipped over. Okay.
Just go into settings, flip the display, and now you're ready to go.
So now this basically is the smarts for a dumb stand.
Correct.
Right. The stand is just a motor, essentially, right?
All your load, PID, everything it's programming through the gauge itself. So you want to set your speed or whatever, you set it in the Force Gage, and away you go.
And Bluetooth communication?
Yep, Bluetooth out to 30 feet. So you hook it up to the RS-232 mode and plug it in the back of the stand and put the gauge in test mode, and you're ready to go.
Basically, battery operated storage. You can store how many measurements?
100.
100, okay. And obviously you could be downloading the measurements as you go anyway.
If you wanted to, or save them in the gauge,
Okay.
and, for transmitting later.
Okay. I know there's some other software functions you want to show us, and rather than try to do it with the camera pointing at the display here, you have a simulator that we can run, and we'll just talk over the...
Correct. Okay, so now we're in the simulator. This is our Starrett software simulator for the Force Gauges. You can do either DFC or DFG. We're doing the DFC on this one. The battery indicator, your force directions, and all the other stuff. But if you come down to the menu button, you can see it's very, very simple to look at the different things that you can do, real-time modes or units or whatever. But if you scroll around using these keys, just to flip the display, how easy it is to flip the display is just basically navigate through, come down to where it says flip display, and hit flip, and then just back out. So you can see real quick, I'm just going to flip it and then flip it back to show you. So now it's obviously flipped, right?
Okay, right.
So now we can go in and scroll through and flip it back. So not very difficult to do. Obviously you're not going to be doing this all the time. Once you flip the display, you're going to basically stay in that mode because it'll be hooked up to the stand and stuff like that. So you can see how easy it was to flip and flip back.
Right.
Also in the simulator, it allows you to apply a load. So if you notice down here, there's a little green bar.
Right.
And as I apply a load to either direction, now I've applied the load, and when I come back, you can see, as I drag it back, you can see that these little anchors down here kind of stay and tell you where it is. So you can see on the compression side, it's actually froze it at that peak 1.
Okay.
Again, I can do it again just by resetting it and hitting the load over
Now I'm
here.
assuming you can set, you can also set like test limits if you wanted to set this up to do go, no go, right?
You can go do go, no go.
Okay.
All those are done by literally hitting the menu, going it in, turning your tolerances
okay.
on and off.
All right.
So you can have your limit 1, limit 2, so you can do that. You can have it beep.
Okay.
So many things you can do in this software or the firmware that's in here.
Okay, so thanks. That was much easier on the simulator.
Yeah.
So again, this is the DFC and the DFG
are our force gauges.
Force gauges. So the DFC is if it's functioning as a controller. DFG if it's
Just a basic gauge.
And you buy them separately that way, or you buy it as a DFC or a DFG?
Either DFD or DFC, and then we have the different capacities. So that's how the gauges are bought off of the size of the capacity in the model.
Okay, terrific. Well, thanks, Eric. Appreciate that. Yeah, that was a great demo. Really versatile tool, the handheld force gauge. We actually do have a couple questions related to that. Before we get to the questions from our audience, I had a question myself, and I think you may have touched on it on there. Maybe I didn't catch it, Eric, but about the ruggedness of it, maybe the IP rating, drop resistance, from a bench, that sort of thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's all tested for being able to drop from a bench from like 3 feet without any damage. If you noticed on all the corners of the gauge, they're all rounded, so as the unit strikes the floor, it dissipates all the energy.
Okay, and I believe what was the IP rating of the force gauge?
There's no IP rating on that.
No IP rating on the gauge. Okay, so just rugged for a drop test. Great. Okay, now we have a couple questions. A couple questions from our audience. Let's take those. And while we're getting those questions up, just a reminder, if you have questions, send them to us at qdl@qualitydigest.com or tweet us at qualitydigest or chat to us. Okay, let's see that first question. All right. What are some typical applications or industries or operations where this equipment is used?
It can be used for any number of things, from a very expensive fish scale to doing coefficient of friction on the floor with the fixture, to how much force does it take this to pull it apart, or to do an insertion, say in a rivet into a hole. There's so many different industries and so many different things these things can be used on. I'm surprised every day when I see a new one.
Now, I think you mentioned to me a while ago about even measuring puncturing, how much force it takes to puncture the lid of like one of those portable coffee pods or something like that, right? I mean, there's really a wide variety of pretty much any place where you want to know what it takes to do something, you can use this.
Correct. I mean, from the prepackaged products that are out there, how much force does it take to puncture through it? For example, if a woman was taking her nail and puncturing through, or somebody was puncturing through a foil or a film, how much force does it take to do that? If it's too hard, then you obviously can't open it up. So you want to know what the puncture force is.
Right, and I believe also you mentioned, we mentioned it briefly, friction. I guess on that you're just pulling some sort of, like a calibrated sled or some sort of sled across a floor if you want to measure like slip resistance or that sort of thing?
That's correct. There's basically a predetermined diameter sled and weight. There's two different medias that they use, one being for ISO, one being for the US. They have two different faces on them. And what you'll do is you'll actually start pulling the sled, and you can do it basically a load over a load or a load over a time. And it'll give you the average load and calculate the coefficient of friction for you.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That's great.
Looks like we have another question.
We've got another question. I'll take this one if we can throw it up on the screen there, and we'll take a look-see. Okay, so a user wants to know, what does L1 mean? Does Starrett produce other ranges of force equipment?
Yes, the L1 is referring to basically a software package. Starrett makes obviously the L1. We make an L2, an L2 plus, and an L3 being our material test package. So it's referring to a software package, and when the software package is combined with the system, say the FMM, then it becomes the L1 test system.
Okay. And so what we were talking about just now, we were talking about your handheld gauge. We also have some bench, or Starrett, I should say, makes some bench top force gauges that we're going to look at here in just a little bit. Why don't you set that up a little bit? Where might you use a bench top force gauge?
Well, the FMM, or the system that you're going to see next, is basically used to apply a force at a given speed that whatever the customer wants to pull something at. And what you do that, why it's used that way, is to get the repeatability from test to test to test. If you were doing it basically on a manual system, you would not get the same repeatability from the equipment where the operator would add an influence into it. So the stand either runs at whatever load you want to go to or whatever speed you want to go at consistently over and over again.
Okay, and so we're going to run a clip here of a demo that we did of one of your bench top force gauges.
In our last segment, we were focusing, or you were focusing, I should say, mostly on the handheld force gauge, right?
That's correct, the DFC.
The DFC, right? And now we've got a test stand in front of us. What I see here is a motorized test stand, looks like a load cell, and then some smarts, a little tablet over here off to the side, right?
Correct, this is our L1 system.
Okay.
So you can tell it by the load cell and the tablet being the DRO.
Okay.
So very, very easy setup system. Again, it's one of 3 different configurations that you can do with the FMM. Again, stand only, or you can do it with the DFC, controlling the stand, or the L1 system that we have here.
All right. Looks like a very simple operator panel.
Yeah, it's pretty simple.
Like I say 2 buttons and a knob.
Yeah, pretty much.
And an emergency switch.
Up, down, and set your speed.
Okay.
So you can set your speed literally by dialing in what you want, and that's in inches a minute. If you want millimeters a minute, press and hold, and that comes up. Now, when you're in the L1 configuration or the DFC, no matter what speed you have dialed in here, either the gauge will override it, because the gauge is controlling the stand, or the software will tell it to do.
So
whatever.
this is strictly if you're running in manual mode. You don't have anything else hooked up to it. You're just going to manually move the stage yourself. And I guess also in manual mode, you've got a scale off here, a distance scale off to the side.
Yeah, that's pretty much how you measure how far you went with the little scale on here.
Okay.
In the other 2 modes, we've got the encoder on the inside, so the gauge reads the feedback from the encoder, or the L1 software does as well. So that's how it judges speed and distance and everything.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about this plate down here.
Well, everyone likes options to mount stuff. So we have 4 different hole mounting options down here, from M4, M6, M10, or an M12. And if you notice, we have the little wall-out holes here to allow you to move it around so that you can keep everything in perfect alignment. On an S-beam load cell or the force gauge, you want to make sure that your load's going straight through and doesn't have offset loading.
Otherwise, you'd get inaccurate readings?
It could damage your load cell.
Or that. Okay.
Yeah, that's the bad part, so you don't want to do that.
Right, okay.
So.
And I should say that the software interface is pretty much as simple as the panel interface.
Yeah, well, last time we were here, we talked about the L2 software. Well, this is a simplified version of L2, being L1. So when you look at the software, it's pretty simple. You have your load and your distance on the DRO.
Okay.
And under where it says test, you have your test that you wrote before.
Okay.
So you can select from any one of those, or we can create a new test.
Okay.
So let's do that.
Okay.
So let's hit the icon with the star at the bottom.
Okay. That one there.
And if you noticed, you have 4 different test choices.
Yep.
Load test, distance test, brake test, and cycle test. Let's do a distance test real quick.
Okay. All right.
Now, if you notice when it comes up, you get 2 choices, either tension or compression. Obviously, we're set up for the tension aspect of this. So
got a rubber band on there.
Yeah, only the finest. And let's go ahead and do a target distance, say 4 inches.
All right.
And let's do a speed of 20 inches a minute.
20 inches a minute. Okay, I'm just following your lead here. 20 inches, 20. There we go. Okay.
All right. So next we want to do is we want to go to pre-test. That's up there, yeah, click that.
All right. Okay.
Any standard instrument, you want to make sure it's zeroed out. So let's 0 load, 0 distance.
Okay.
And if you go to where it says setting, all the way at the top, we want to go where it says set home. Then all we're doing here is just saying, hey, remember where you're at. Set home, yes.
Okay.
Now if you go to the bottom icon and click that.
The little arrow?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
And now you want to go ahead and return home.
Return home.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Now hit the green check mark twice.
Okay. Check one. Do again. Okay.
We want to save it, obviously.
Save it.
I'll save it whatever number it comes up. Let's just hit done.
But I could type anything I wanted in
You
there.
can go back and rename it any time.
Okay.
So
All right, that's it.
When it comes up, let's just hit start test.
All right. We'll do it. That easy. That's pretty
That easy.
straightforward. Even I can do it. All right.
So as you can see on the screen here, the test is running. You're getting your data as it's coming up.
Right. You can see it's stretching out that rubber band there.
Yeah. So it's going to return because that's what you told it to do. So it's returning home. And if you don't mind, when it gets done, go ahead and hit start test one more time for me, okay?
Okay. Start test over here. All right. Okay, now it's perfect.
And
Right.
when it comes back to home, this time here, if you don't mind, touch the run number 1
Okay.
for me.
Now I'm assuming also as it's taking data, you could set limits and
Correct.
it could tell you whether it was within limits or outside of limits. Okay.
Correct, yes.
So press the 1 button.
Uh-huh. So now you'll notice there's the 2 runs
Oh,
that we
okay.
just did overlaid.
Okay.
And to your point about limits, the data that's on the side would go red. The numbers would go red if it fell out of whatever limits that you set.
And with each run, I could keep overlaying multiple
many
runs.
times as you want.
And you could do stuff like average the runs and that sort of thing.
Yep.
Various operations on it. Okay.
Very, very simple.
Okay. So that's all there is to it. That's all there is to programming it. Okay.
That is it.
Okay.
So
And you
very
would just
easy to use.
You would just change your load cell based on
The different load capacities that you're trying to run.
Okay.
And you want to make sure you stay within not
Okay.
a real big load cell.
and the calibration information for load cell.
It's stored in the chip in the back.
Okay. So,
So-
when the load cell hooks up to the
Plug and play.
device, it
Plug and play.
knows everything about it. Okay.
Yep, you're
All
ready
right.
to go.
Okay. That seems pretty straightforward. Run through us again the different sizes of the frames.
Well, we have 3 different standard sizes, the 110, the 330, and the 550, and we have extended column or travel, which is the 110X, 330X, and the 550X.
Okay. Terrific. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
All right. Well, thanks, Eric, for showing us. Those were the benchtop. That was the benchtop force measurement tester. So one thing that I'm not sure we really covered in there really fully is the ability to export data. So if people need their test reports for clients, customers, suppliers, that sort of thing. There's a lot of capabilities in terms of being export that data, send it out to them.
That's correct. You can, if you're using the L1 system with the tablet, you can have it directly connected onto their network or whatever, and as any standard Windows 10 system, it'll put data wherever you want to put it. If you're using the DFC configuration, then you can either store the data in the gauge or you can actually have it Bluetooth out to a PC and have it go ahead and store the data as you're taking it.
Yeah, no, actually, let's touch on that a little bit. So, are you seeing just from your customers? Are you seeing more interest in? I hope I get these right. The DFC, which is the force, the handheld, which you can mount to a benchtop system, or are you seeing more interest in more the integrated system, which we just looked at?
It's based on the customer need. If they have something where say that the L1 system won't work for them because it's cost prohibitive to get the software validated, then you would go with the DFC. If they want to go ahead and have multiple tests preloaded on the system, the L1 is the way to go. So you can have all your tests predefined. All the operator would do is walk up, scan a barcode, or tap the test they want to run on the display, and away they go. So it's basically based on the customer's needs.
Yeah, that was an important bit that I'm not sure people caught when we were talking about on that earlier clip on the handheld gauge, because it's firmware that helps really smooth things over when you're selling it within the medical device market.
That's correct. You don't want any ability to make any changes for the operator to make any changes to meet like the CFR 21 Part 11 compliance. So the firmware-based only system really helps out in that requirement because there's nothing to change.
Well, now we got a couple more questions from the audience, but before we go to them, I want to remind you all, of course, you can send your questions in to QDL@QualityDigest.com. You can find us on Twitter @QualityDigest, or use the little chat function on your screen there if you want to send us a question via chat. And I want to point out, we got a kind of a big show here today. We're doing a lot of different segments. If your questions come in and we don't get to them in this particular segment, send them in anyway. We'll kind of wrap them up at the end of the show. And also, if we don't happen to even wrap them up at the end of the show, we'll forward your questions on to the application engineers that we've had on the show here today, and they'll answer them directly via email for you after the show or later this weekend or maybe next week. All right, So let's move on. We did have a question that I understand from the audience. I have plants in Mexico. Do you have translation to Spanish? Interesting question.
In both packages, we do. The Force Gage has Spanish in it, and then if you switch over in the language section, you can select Spanish in the L1 software.
How many languages are in that software?
I think we're up to 5 or 6 different languages in both.
Great. And I think we had one other I heard that came in, so let's take a look at that one. Okay, what differentiates the new Starrett handheld Force Gages from others that are on the market?
Well, there's a couple things. When we looked at designing everything, we wanted to be the newest and freshest, so we incorporated as many new things as we possibly can, and one of them being the ability to meet any protocols that the customer may want to run: Bluetooth, RS-232, USB, anything of that nature. We wanted to make sure we encompass that. So, not having any legacy issues, we were able to start with a clean piece of paper. So, like the DFC and the firmware only, the L1, super easy to use. We were trying to go for the ease of use for an operator that doesn't have to be trained over and over again when they try to use the product.
Okay, and I think did I see another question flash up there?
We had one other question so far. Yeah, let's take a look at that one.
Okay. How would I choose? Oh, you had mentioned, you had mentioned that there were several different size units of the benchtop. So this question addresses that. How would I choose which capacity to purchase if I bought the 500 foot-pound unit but only needed 5 foot-pound max? Would I be sacrificing accuracy or features, or are the higher capacity models more expensive?
Well, they're all the same price, so that's not an issue. Being anything in force measurement is always based on a full scale instead of reading. So what you'd want to do is, just like a pressure gauge or anything else, you want to make sure that the range you're going to operate in is pretty much mid-scale of the force gauge or the test stand you're going to use. So if you don't want to run them always at full scale for a chance of an overload, but you don't want to use them at the bottom of the scale either, because that's the least accurate for anything in force measurement.
And I believe, and I'm not real familiar with how force gauges work, but as long as you have the frame size, which can withstand a certain amount, but really you're using the load cell, I think is what you said. The load cell is what kind of determining what range you're going to measure within, right?
That's correct. So all our frames are based off of the max capacity of the frame, being a 110, a 330, or a 550. That's the maximum force that it'll go up to at maximum speed, which would be 40 inches a minute. So you want to make sure that you scale the load cell properly.
Right. So again, I'm a geek on these things. I got to learn something all the time. So you could have a 500 foot-pound capable benchtop unit, but put a 10 foot-pound load cell in it if you were going to be measuring within that range of 10 foot-pounds.
That's correct. So anytime that you mount either a external load cell or the force gauge, irregardless of the capacity of the frame, all systems will stop at the max capacity that's connected to it, either 10-pound load cell or the force gauge.
Got it.
Great. Thanks, Eric.
Learn something new every day.
Well, there you go, Dirk. You are a geek, definitely. Well, great. All right. Well, thanks, Eric. And again, anyone, if you do have more questions, we're coming up towards the end of the segment, but if you do, certainly send them to us anyway at qdl@qualitydigest.com or find us on Twitter at Quality Digest or chat to us, and we'll get them to Eric after the show. He'll get back to you after that. Well, that'll do it for the first segment of the show, but before we move on, of course, we'd like to thank our sponsor for this segment, the LS Starrett Company. The L1 system is the latest addition to Starrett's complete range of force measurement equipment. Whether your requirements are simple or highly advanced, Starrett has the equipment, software, and technical expertise to provide superior solutions for strength and material testing. From application analysis, system specification, installation, and training to post-installation field services, the excellence of the Starrett line is matched by the quality and comprehensive range of their services. For more information, visit online at www.starrett.com or call 978-249-3551. Well, Eric Perkins, thanks again for joining us today. Thank you for coming in and giving us that great demo a couple of weeks back, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Okay, take care.
Talk to you soon, Eric. Bye-bye now. Yeah, good stuff there, Dirk. I think that that as you say, you're a geek, and we're all geeks here.
We're all geeks. Yep.
Many in our audience probably are too. But yeah, you learn something new from that demo. I think really a couple of good.
That's why I like having
pieces.
demos come in, is because we see this equipment all the time at trade shows, but you don't always have time to actually learn something kind of in depth about it. And so when they come into the studio, it gives us a lot of chance to really ask our own personal questions as complete dummies in this field.
Right.
Is to really approach it from the just point of some view of somebody who's just interested in learning and what this equipment does and how it works.
Beginner's mind.
Yeah, beginner's mind.
As we say, yeah. So good stuff there from Starrett and Eric Perkins.